Juilliard School.
Whoever you are, we're glad to see you.
We were just rehearsing our newest piece by Philip Lasser. We're going to premiere it at the Juilliard School on Valentine's Day.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you could all hear me. My name is Xiang Gao. I am the Artistic Director of Master Players Concert Series at the University of Delaware. And now I'm pleased to introduce my guests, Kevin Cobb and John Rojak of the American Brass Quintet, to your screens. The American Brass Quintet, in short ABQ, is made up of trumpeters Kevin Cobb and Louis Hanslick, horn player Eric Reed, trombonist Michael Powell, and bass trombonist John Rojak. Many of you might already know the five of them will be featured next season to perform their Master Players debut and our very popular Holiday Pops concert on Saturday, December 6, 2020 at 3 p.m. in the Gore Recital Hall. So now I'd like to welcome John and Kevin, the two members of the quintet.
That's really great to be here, sort of. I mean, it's actually great to be where I am.
I can hear you just fine. Yeah, nice to be here.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Can I ask Kevin, what are we discussing today? Please remind us.
I'm guessing that mainly we're going to talk about brass quintet music.
Great. John, where are all your members located?
Kevin and Mike Powell both live in Leonia, New Jersey, which is right over the George Washington Bridge from New York City. Eric, our horn player, is in Riverdale, in the Bronx. Louis, our other trumpet, is in Storrs, Connecticut. And I was a week ago in Putnam Valley, New York, which is about an hour north of the city. So we're based around the city, but I decided, in the spirit of our summer festivals, even though they're not happening, to come out to Colorado anyhow. And since it's the only time of year I get into shape, that I would try to do that.
Excellent. So I want to ask both of you, John plays the bass trombone and Kevin is the trumpeter. Can you share with our audience today, why did you pick your current instrument and how did you get into the music industry and to be where you are today?
I actually started on guitar when I was about 7 years old. And then when I first started, it was either guitar or drums. And my parents said, you're going to play guitar. And so then I played guitar. And then in 5th grade, when you could join the band, as a lot of brass players do, the local school sent home forms asking us, what we wanted to play. And I said I wanted to play either trumpet or drums. And my parents said, you're going to play trumpet. So I always joke that, had I been playing drums from 7 years old, I could have been such a amazing drummer. But no, so actually when I started playing trumpet, I was trying a couple different instruments, but a very good close friend of our family's had a trumpet and gave it to us, and then sort of went from there.
You did pretty well. I'm glad. John.
Similar to Kevin's experience, I was instructed to learn an instrument, and I told my mom I wanted to play guitar, and she said, they don't offer free guitar lessons, pick something else. So I said, okay, trombone. So I played the trombone. And I think it was because at that time in pop music, there was a lot of brass going on, and I always reference Neil Diamond's songs, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears were coming around, and Chicago, and all these groups. I was hearing it on the radio all the time. And then when I was in college, my first semester as a freshman, I didn't like my placement in the bands. I was a tenor trombonist. And at the end of the first semester, one of the two bass trombone players graduated, and there was an opening in the symphony orchestra, and I wanted to play in the orchestra, so I switched to bass trombone, and it stuck.
Well, I have to say we're very grateful you both made those decisions. You are in one of the world's most visible chamber ensembles in the history of our industry, and we're very grateful you're making time for our audience Can you share with us, as members of ABQ, why do you like to perform chamber music for the brass instruments?
There's a lot more invested in playing chamber music. We've all played many styles. We've all played big bands and shows and a lot of orchestra. And in orchestral playing, it's exciting, it's thrilling. There's a lot of sitting around for the brass, which is okay too. You get to see who's in the audience and who forgot to come to your concert. But when you're in, in an orchestra, there are maybe 60, 70 people, and there's a conductor telling you what you ought to be doing. In chamber music, there are only, in our case, 5 of us, and we have such an invested interest, such creativity in our hands. We have such say in the product, the musical product. It's really gratifying, and it's, I think, something when we haven't rehearsed for a while and we get back together, we all leave the room at the end of rehearsal thinking how wonderful that was to, again, have such say in the final product.
I think string players and pianists know the depths and the satisfaction of playing great chamber music. And brass players, we have arguably, in my opinion, some of the greatest parts in the orchestral literature. And we get to play, as John said, big bands and everything else, which is awesome. But there really is something special about being in an intimate chamber music group, one on a part. The ownership of it, the collaboration of that intimacy is really something special. So I think once you get bitten by that bug, it's hard to go back.
Absolutely. You guys perform all the time internationally. How many rehearsals do you usually have before a concert?
One too few. And I think this is Kevin's fault. We're perfectionists. And it's not us. It's not me and Kevin and Louis and Eric and Mike. It's the American Brass Quintet. Yeah. It's this legacy that we've walked into, that how we've become a part of this amazing history at this point. And we are just current shareholders. So we have to present the product that represents this amazing legacy of our predecessors.
So when you were little, both of you learning music as beginners, what brass chamber group did you admire the most or look up to?
I think most brass players get introduced to Canadian brass pretty early on. They certainly are the biggest name in chamber brass. And I saw one of their concerts early on. It was great, and they were having so much fun, and so that sparked the interest. But my background's a little bit unusual in that ever since I started playing the trumpet, I studied with a member of a working brass quintet. His name's Martin Porter, and he was a member of the Tower Brass. Tower Brass still going in northwestern Ohio. Shout out to Tower Brass Quintet. And so Marty put me in a brass quintet, I want to say in 6th grade. And so it's always been a part of what I've done, and that was just sort of normal for me.
My colleague Jasmine Lee, who is a cellist and also a professional music educator in Delaware, she's a member of the Master Players Concert Series team, being the manager of our outreach programs, and she would love to help me to ask some questions from the audience. So Jasmine, please join us. Can you hear us?
Hi, Kevin and John and everybody out there. It's an honor to be back for another Backstage Pass Online event. And it's especially a pleasure to be here with you two. So to start, I have to ask Kevin, the American Brass Quintet has been in the business for 60 years. What's the secret to your ensemble's longevity?
That's a really good question. I don't know, like stubbornness, probably. I think I say that a little bit jokingly, but honestly, I think, as John was alluding to before, the current membership is deeply grateful for all the people that have come before us. And those guys, particularly in the sort of, early years into the 70s, they set the bar really high just by, sheer willpower. Getting the quality of the group at a certain level, really putting the mission of the group always at the forefront of whatever the group did. So that set the standard for the rest of us coming into the group, and everybody who's come in since has accepted that, understood that, and embraced it moving forward. So we really do believe, as John said, that we're just occupying the chairs until the next person comes out. So the mission is really forefront in everybody's mind.
That's awesome. It sounds like there's an incredible legacy for everybody. So some people have said that between Renaissance and contemporary music, there isn't a great deal available for the brass quintet. So can you talk a little bit about why there's such a black hole for so long?
I think there was an extreme level of ignorance among composers after the Renaissance. No, I'm just kidding. During the Renaissance, the sort of the virtuoso instrument was the cornetto. Before the development of violin and stringed instruments, there were viols, of course, and consorts, but the cornetto was a virtuoso instrument, so composers were writing for that. And of course, in the Renaissance, most musicians played many instruments, multi-instrumentalists. The trombone, as far as trombonists are concerned, was conceived in the mid-1400s as a perfect instrument and hasn't changed much. But the trombone at that time was the only fully chromatic brass instrument, so it was very useful in various types of music. There was a lot of, in the Renaissance, church music and secular music for events and celebrations. And going into the Baroque, into the mid-1600s, mid-17th century, violin took over, and just the way music was being written changed quite a bit until into the 19th century. In the early 19th century, the valve was developed. So then we had fully chromatic trumpets and horns and tubas and other instruments. And then that's when music started to be written again, but not a lot. At that time, string quartets had been developing, and for chamber music, it seemed like that was the more common era until basically into the mid-20th century. So it wasn't until sort of after World War II, or around World War II, that a lot of brass players started, looking for other outlets besides big band and orchestra and concert bands, that small groups were forming for brass players to have outlets, and composers were starting to write for it. And then groups like New York Brass Quintet and American Brass Quintet and many other groups came along and started asking composers for music. And we actually had a database on our website for a while. It had to be fixed up a bit, but it stored pieces written, and it was far from complete, pieces written since 1950, and there were over 1,400 pieces for brass quintet listed.
Wow.
So there's been quite a bit, and mid-20th century till now has been a tremendous age for brass chamber music. But there was that gap because of natural trumpets and horns without valves. It was difficult to have that full spectrum of range of music being able to be written as for string quartets.
Wow. Thank you, John, for that much needed history lesson. It's so enriching to learn about other disciplines. A lot of us at Master Players, we mentioned this, we're primarily string players, so it's fantastic that we get to talk to you both in such depth about this.
Thank you for being interested.
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing. So I do have to say I'm glad that most of our audience members have been to a brass recital. That's fantastic. Super exciting. Thank you for sharing that with us. And now moving on, John, how many recordings has the American Brass Quintet released?
It's hard to keep track. I think we're close to 60. And that's not full albums necessarily. Full albums probably could be close to 35 or 40, but then we have single pieces on many other discs, like composers will write a piece for us, and a piece that we've recorded will go on their disc rather than our disc.
Is there a specific venue you enjoy recording in?
As of late, we've been using the Academy of Arts and Letters here in New York, and that has just a wonderful sound. I think, regardless of the ensemble going in there, it's just a beautiful place to play. I mean, and to your point, I think that it's interesting when we actually tour. It's interesting the venues that presenters sometimes put us in because they think, well, it's brass and it's going to be really loud. They're thinking the orchestra section or a band, and so they put us in a 2,000, 3,000 seat hall. You know, we usually are most comfortable in halls of medium size, I'd say 300 to 500 seats, and there are some wonderful halls all around the country. But
We found another great spot, Concordia College in Bronxville, which is now close. And it sounded amazing, except with the addition of the weed whacker outside and the occasional siren. So that's a huge issue for recording, that you need a great sounding place that is isolated from outside sounds.
The unique troubles of New York City, though, I suppose.
Yes.
Kevin, I have to ask, on behalf of your group, do you produce your own recordings or do you rely on a sound engineer, and why?
yeah, that's a great question, and actually I would say that one that's sort of evolving as we go. Since I've been in the group, we've always recorded with an engineer, and for a number of different reasons. And the woman that we've worked with most frequently is Judy Sherman, and she's just fantastic. So we use Judy a lot because she gets a great sound of the group. It's not something that any one of us are particularly skilled at. We don't have to sort of fiddle with the mics and try to get things set up and to go in and listen to it, come back out and fiddle with it again. She takes care of all that. So all we have to really think about is just making music. And not revealing too much about the answer to the poll question, but Judy is really good at telling us what we have and what we can move on from. And I think sometimes when people are trying to do their own recordings, that's a particularly hard one. You're trying to think as you're recording, well, what do I, did we mess that up? Do I need to go back? How's that going to come out? It's impossible. So I think that it's much better to have somebody, another pair of ears on the other side.
So just quickly going back to the answers to the previous poll. So for our group here, they control the intonation and timbre of 5 different instruments, and pacing to account for fatigue to be some of the biggest challenges for brass music in recording sessions. But really, all of these are great answers. You could not go wrong.
So I have this short clip of you making a CD.
And there you saw the venue that Kevin was just mentioning. That's the Academy of Arts and Letters, and it's beautiful.
John, one of the audience members said, when are you going to bring the group back to your hometown in the Boston area? They miss you and the ABC.
That's funny. That's from a friend of mine that I've known since we were 6. And well, we were supposed to be there March 21st. We were supposed to be in Concord, Mass, March 21st. Unfortunately, that was canceled. So yeah, we'll be back in the Boston area as soon as Concord Library can reschedule.
Do you all do transcriptions of music from other genres, other areas, vocal music, string, woodwind, or brass quintet?
That's a great question, and the answer is no, but yes. We're sort of known in the business as purists, and we tend not to play arrangements or transcriptions. I think it wasn't until the early 1990s, shortly after I joined the group, that we started playing vocal music. It used to be one of the things ABQ did not do, but we don't play, like an arrangement of March Slav or Eine kleine Nachtmusik. We're trying to play music that was written for brass, and as I mentioned before, the 1,400 or way more than 1,400 pieces that are written for brass. There's spectacular repertoire for us, really wonderful repertoire that we don't need to. We can't even play the brass music that we would love to play. There's so much that we can, and we, maximum 6 pieces on a concert.
So I'd like to ask Kevin about your Australia tour back in 2014. I've heard that people are still talking about it, so please tell us some more about it.
Yeah, that was a tour that had been in the works for, geez, I don't know, it was a couple of years probably, right, John? Maybe longer than that. I don't know. It
Yeah.
seemed like we'd been talking about it for a very long time, and Musica Viva, which is a huge presenting organization over there, finally was able to get us over, and we can't say enough good things about them. They have connections all over Australia, and they brought us to different parts of the country, and it was really phenomenal. I can tell you that we had a really great time. We played in some fantastic halls. We drank some good wine. But my daughter was about 4 months old at the time, and I was really, really tired. And so I remember getting on a plane, and I remember there being concerts, and there were some things that we were doing in between, and more planes. And then I came home, and it was kind of like a big blur. I don't know, John's going to remember more than I do.
Kevin, you had a really good time.
Did I? Oh, good.
What was happening that we had just changed membership. Ray Mace had retired from ABQ after 41 years, and Dave Wakefield retired after 38 years. And we had 2 new members, and actually Musica Viva was very worried about it. They said, well, why are you trying out these new members, 2 new members of the group on us? Giving them out-of-town tryout. We said, no. It's quite the contrary. We've got these new infusion of energy. We hadn't had a personnel change for 16 years at that point.
This was an exciting turn of events.
Very exciting. It was so great, and 40 years is a pretty good run in a brass quintet, we think. So Ray and Dave had amazing journeys with us and great times. But we went to Australia, and we actually had a bonus day in San Francisco, courtesy of United Airlines. They missed their own connection by 10 minutes. Decided not to hold a 15-hour flight for us. For about 20 people missed the flight.
Oh my goodness.
But we actually had a wonderful day in San Francisco. We went over to the conservatory and practiced, and saw some old friends. But we got to Australia, so we were a day late, and Louis Hanslick and I had to go directly to Australian Broadcasting Corporation for our first interview. We were a little bit punchy. There were all sorts of, so much press. They were so organized for Musica Viva. And one of, concerts in 8 cities. Kevin mentioned we were 8 cities: Sydney, Newcastle, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Perth, which is way over, actually closer to India than it is to the other side of Australia, and Hobart in Tasmania. And one of the things I remember is we did a radio interview on a drive time slot, which means they had to ask us a question and then get to traffic and weather together and then come back and do a little more ABQ, which I learned when the host asked what kind of music we played, and I started an elaborate description of Renaissance music and contemporary. He said, "Oh, classical." I said, "Yes, classical." So I was coming up with quick answers after that, and he said, "I understand you just came from a master class. What does that mean, a master class?" And I said, "Well, it's when students play for you, and we tell them how to make it sound better." His follow-up question to that was, "What do you mean better?" How do you find a quick answer for that? So
Yeah.
I said, imagine you had a row of blocks, and the blocks were in a straight line, and we thought it might be more beautiful or more interesting to make them in a curved line. We tell you how to make a curved line. So that was my 20-second before traffic and weather together answer on the drive time radio
That's a
interview.
really fantastic anecdote for a non-musician, and makes it super easy and straightforward to understand. That's fantastic. So I have another poll question for the audience. Is there another ABQ called the Australian Brass Quintet? I have another promo clip from your Australian tour that we'd love to share with the audience.
That's great. Hey, John, would you share with us the answer to that poll question?
Yes, I will, and the answer is yes. There is an Australian brass quintet, and actually, we hung out with them a little bit. And they were great guys. As sort of, I think our biggest impression of Australia was that everybody seemed to be great people. It was so wonderful. The reception there was fantastic, and no one seemed to have a chip on their shoulder. It was just so welcoming and warm. And a few of us went out in Melbourne with some members of the Australian Brass. We went to a beautiful wine bar that was also a wine shop. And for some reason, someone thought that I was an expert in wine, so they told me to choose the bottle of wine to go with what we were eating. So, being the expert in wine that I am, I went to the store owner and said, because it was in a different room, I went over to him in the shop section of this place and asked for a certain price point that was going to be very reasonable. Said, can you pick something that is going to be really fantastic and that's going to go with your world-famous chicken dish that was supposed to be one of the top 50 things to eat in Australia, and make me look good. And he brought it over, and we started drinking. These guys were so impressed at what a fantastic choice I had made.
Kevin, you have performed as a member of the American Brass Quintet in many unusual venues outside of the regular recital halls or concert halls. Can you share with us where have you performed and any of the favorite venues or unusual venues? And I have a clip I wanted to test the audience about the location.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask this question, so I was doing some thinking about it. And, interestingly, I was thinking about the traditional venues that we played that are fantastic. We did a trip to Prague where we had this was right after September 11th, or shortly thereafter, and we played in this beautiful cathedral in Prague that was just stunning. And so there are a lot of memorable places like that, the Australia tour. But interestingly enough, I started thinking about some of the most memorable concerts, and there are a few things that stand out that I wouldn't say are particularly great concert halls, but I remember them very well as concerts. One was a concert that I did early on in the group at the British Virgin Islands. It was my first tour in the group, and we played a concert in a little. It was like a little trailer, basically. Remember, John? And I was, of course, so happy to be in the group. I didn't care. We could have been playing in the water somewhere. Yeah, it was great. So that will always be a fun memory. I remember we played at a bar, which is really unusual for us, and you're thinking, well, how does that is that going to square up? But it was a bar that had. This was in where was it? It was in Idaho.
Ketchum, Idaho.
Ketchum, Idaho, and they had it was an association with the concert presenting series in the town where the artists would go to the pub while the patrons were having drinks and dinner, and we set up in the corner, and it looked just like any other Irish pub, but surprisingly, when we started playing, everybody got very quiet, paid attention. They clapped when they were supposed to clap. They were really into it, and we played all of our stuff. We didn't play any sort of pop light things. We played the Gunther Schuller, and we played all of our early music, and so it's those kind of things. I think that what makes the venue memorable is the experience that the quintet had there, maybe more so than the actual venue itself.
Great. I have this short clip of a performance at an unusual place I want to share with the audience. And then we have a poll question for all of you from the American Brass Quintet. What is the name of the venue ABQ performed in this next clip? And so it's either MoMA in London, the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, Tokyo National Museum, the MoMA in New York City.
That performance?
That was, I think everybody will get this right, the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. And that was a concert we played. We got involved with George Steele and his vocal group. It's amazing to hear the sound travel however high, 100 feet into the air and spin around that space. It's sort of a real, obviously unique to that space in New York City. So it's a tremendous collaboration for us, and hopefully that will continue.
Do any of you members improvise?
Not intentionally.
Not in public.
Our other trumpet player, Lewis, is a bit of a jazz player. He improvises. I mean, we all do that. I don't want to put it into a category, but there are improvisatory contemporary music pieces, and so we'll do that. But for jazz improvisation, I stopped shortly after I got to New York, and I started playing in big bands with real jazz players, and I thought, I sure want to hear them more than I want to hear me.
Well, you guys sound unbelievable, I have to say, improvised or not. I have to say that I understand you've done a lot of creative projects with different artists collaborating. Recently, you did something with the choir in Los Angeles with UCLA School of Music. We don't have a lot of time. We have to skip that. I like to go into this next performance. I have a short clip of you performing a piece called Common Heroes, Uncommon Land. Kevin, would you share with us a little bit background knowledge behind this piece?
Sure. Yeah, so this was a piece written by Philip Lasser, who was actually my piano proficiency teacher at Juilliard, and fortunately he passed me. He probably knew that I was going to be in a brass quintet, and one day he would angle that so that he would write a piece. But honestly, Phil and I have remained friends and acquaintances at Juilliard over the years, and I've always loved his work. And so, like many things for our commissions, everything just sort of lined up properly. The funding, his availability, our availability, and so finally we were able to get a piece from him, and it's a fantastic piece. I encourage everybody to check it out if you haven't already. It's a beautiful piece. It's familiar, but it's also unfamiliar. He uses poetry in the middle of the piece, in between movements and during movements at times, which was something that we had to wrap our heads around a little bit. But I think it's tremendously effective. I think people really respond beautifully to this piece. Philip writes from the heart, and I think anytime you have an artist that does that, you sense it and you know that, and his piece is no different.
In the morning, I look to the sky and listen to the hustle and bustle of the city streets. All the people walking, riding, running, always going. The call of the morning sweeps across the nation.
That's lovely, beautiful. I actually love to watch the whole thing very soon, or watch you perform live.
You all were celebrating the ABQ's 30th anniversary of teaching, at the Juilliard School. Congratulations. I'd like to ask John a little bit more about your connections with the Juilliard School.
Back in about 1987, Juilliard decided to add other chamber music ensembles and residents other than the Juilliard String Quartet, which had been there for, I think, 275 years, or a few years. And the American Brass Quintet, and I can say this in all humility because I was not in the group at that time, the American Brass Quintet was the obvious choice because of the dedication to serious chamber music and their dedication to education, which has really continued. It's very odd for us to be on tour and not give master classes. It feels strange, actually. Juilliard created this opportunity for us and let us set the curriculum. We have a seminar which pretty much all the brass students have to go through for at least 2 semesters, and many of them stay in the entire time they're in school. We organize chamber groups, either quintets, quartets, horn quartets, trombone quartets, and mixed brass groups. They perform for each other. We have different topics, things that you might imagine would be some of the things we touched on today. Try to give them some business skills, because even if you're the best player on the planet, you're going to have to run into things you need to deal with at some point. So we try to prepare them for all sorts of stuff that's going to happen when they enter their careers. We have a class concert at the end of each semester, and we try to give them the skills in chamber music that will carry over to any music that they play. And that's what is so important with chamber music and so wonderful, that imagine an entire orchestra of chamber musicians, everybody listening. It makes the conductor either obsolete or makes his job a whole lot easier.
What is the best advice that you can give to brass students, or advice that can be passed on to brass students about going into such a competitive career?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I think that all of us are telling our students sort of similar things right now, which is particularly now, which is to sort of stay on course, stay true to what you believe. I think being flexible for us in the ABQ and as freelancers around New York, I mean, so the American Brass Quintet is not our main source of income, but it's obviously our most important the piece of art that we do. So we have to do a lot of other things in the city to support that quintet habit, so to speak. But being flexible, I think, is a real key because you never know what's going to turn into a career. And I'm sure every one of you sitting on this panel, or the teachers at UDEL, or would say, "Geez, 10 years ago, I'm not sure I would have thought I would be doing this." But then it happens, and opportunities come in different ways at different times. So continue to learn a piano, so maybe you could arrange things. Continue to be able to write the English language, so you can write grant applications. Keep reading, keep looking at art. All these things are part of continuing education that, as musicians, I don't think it ever stops. But being flexible is one way to sort of be open to more opportunities.
Thank you so much, Kevin and John. I know you also teach at the Aspen Music Festival, which is sadly canceled this year because of the COVID-19. And I wanted to tell everybody out there, you've been amazing educators in the brass world, and we're very grateful for that. And would you share with us the history of ABQ? I know there's former members prior to you, and are you the second generation, third generation? We have some historic photos from your website I want to share with the audience very soon.
The group started in 1960. Arnie Fromm, tenor trombonist, came from San Antonio. He had copyrighted the name American Brass down there and came to New York, experimented with various players and groups. And so this is the poster of the first concert, first public performance of the American Brass Quintet. Gil Cohen was the original bass trombonist, And he wound up about 2 years later getting in the New York Philharmonic, playing second trombone, is when Bob Biddlecombe took over the chair for 28 years, which was amazing at the time, and now it's sort of astounding that I've been in the group longer than Bob was. And Jerry Schwartz was an early member that became a conductor and really phenomenal. He was actually my coach at Juilliard and really great musician. Lou Ranger was in the group for a long time. That's a picture of Bob Biddlecombe and Ronnie Anderson. There's Jerry Schwartz with his 70s mustache. Doug Edelman was a trombonist for a couple of years. That's Lou Ranger. An amazing legacy. 1970, they started and there's Ray Mace with his long hair, his adolescent look. So I don't know if anybody has ever, hopefully people will get a chuckle out of Ray there, the second chair in trumpet. 1970, there was a Rockefeller Foundation grant that allowed a residency in Aspen, and it was so successful that the music festival decided to continue the quintet as faculty members, running the brass chamber music and also playing in the orchestras, which remain. And this is a great photo of Ludoslavsky meeting the quintet when they played his mini overture in the tent. That's about 1983, I think, shortly after Mike Powell joined. And speaking of legacy, in the 1960s to 70, there was a bit of a turnover. So there were probably 3 or 4 trumpets on each chair, and a couple of trombone players. But since Mike joined in 1983, 8 years went by till I joined in 91. 8 more years went by until Kevin joined in 98. And then 16 years went by before the next personnel change. So the group has a real long-standing, and people ask sometimes how we get this unified sound and what happens when a new member joins. Well, it's sort of easy because we have an audition and we pick somebody who has the same sensibilities, and we take someone who's going to be musically compatible with us, and it's one person joining 4. I remember when I joined, it was just so easy to play, and 4 people knowing the music well was such a joy to come in and play with a group that knew each other so well. To fit in that was a piece of cake. So it's got quite a legacy. Some players who did well. Alan Dean, who recently retired from professor at Yale, replaced by Kevin Cobb, was in our group in the 60s.
So really quick, I'd like to announce the poll answers. They are younger than Juilliard, but older than Kronos. That's fantastic.
Well-adjusted middle child.
Yes, the middle child of the ensembles. Now, I don't mean to make you feel old, but I have a clip from 1993. What I understand is an amazing video from 1993 before I was born. It's part of a famous TV broadcasting program called Live from Lincoln Center, and it shows your performance with some of the previous members. Can you talk about this clip?
Yes, and I'm sorry, Jasmine, that you missed so much amazing history before you were born. It was a really great time.
can I just jump in? Because I would just want to say, so that was shortly before I first heard the American Brass Quintet for the first time, or around that time. And we just saw this recently, it just came to us, and I loved seeing this because I remember thinking, you know, that group sound with all those guys, with Ray and Chris and Dave and Mike and John. I remember so vividly watching a concert that they did in Haverford College when I was in school in Philly, and my roommate and I were blown away. And I remember taking the train home, thinking, I have never heard, you know, like dedicated, sensitive playing like that before, coming out of 5 brass players. It was incredible. So seeing a video like that again, it reminds me of that time when it was just, you know, seeing the quintet was so exciting, and yeah, it makes me feel like, yeah, I'm proud to be a part of the group.
Well, the memories are refreshed. I guess we were thinner then. It was a cool piece. That was a piece by John Corigliano. And the people in the balcony, the brass players in the balcony, were the Meridian Brass Ensemble, Meridian Arts Ensemble, plus the virtuoso solo horn player Bobby Rooch. But that was, yeah, Ray Mace, Chris Gecker, who was Kevin's immediate predecessor, Dave Wakefield playing horn, and Mike Powell and I were the only members remaining in the group from '93. And apparently Mike Powell is the only person whose looks never change. He looks basically exactly the same now as he did then. It was kind of a very nice honor for us and a thrill, especially playing in Alice Tully. Alice Tully is a wonderful place, and we don't get to play there too often, even though it's basically in the Juilliard building, but it's a pretty large venue, wonderful acoustics, and a really nice honor for us to be involved. That was a huge gala for Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society.
That's great. John and Kevin, I really want to thank you so much for making time for our audience today. I wish you a healthy and a safe summer. We're so looking forward to your debut on Master Players series on December 6th, Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. in the Gore Recital Hall here in Delaware. We have a short last video to share with our audience today as our finale. Before that, I want to thank all of our audience members out there. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Now back to our wonderful guest speakers, Kevin and John of the American Brass Quintet.
First of all, I told you we couldn't do everything in an hour. And we look forward to chapter 2. But sorry we didn't get to answer questions. It was a great pleasure for us to talk about ABQ and have a forum like this, and hope that everyone will, of course, follow us on whatever those social media are. But it was a pleasure to be here with Xiang and Jasmine, and it was wonderful. And we can't wait. We sure hope that we'll be there in person in December.
Thank you.